Hello, in this video I'm going to discuss how to connect to EC2 using Fleet Manager, which is a feature of AWS Systems Manager. This is part 5 of How Do I Connect to my EC2 series. In this video, I'll start with a quick demonstration, then go through the steps to build the solution. I will conclude with pros and cons of using the Fleet Manager and discuss some alternatives that you may want to consider. You can jump to any section of this video using the chapter links in the description. Fleet Manager uses Session Manager for connecting to EC2, so you can get all the advantages of Session Manager when using the Fleet Manager. This includes not having to open inbound ports such as port 22 for SSH. You also don't need a private key file or username password to authenticate. Instead, it uses IAM Permission to control who can connect to your EC2. It works for both Linux and Windows servers. If your EC2 is inside a private subnet, meaning it doesn't have a public IP address or access to the internet via the internet gateway, you can still connect using Session Manager through VPC endpoint. So what does Fleet Manager give us that Session Manager doesn't already provide? There are two features I want to highlight in this video. First is the Fleet Manager's default host management. This feature allows you to eliminate having to attach a role to each EC2 using the instance profile. The second feature is connecting to Windows Server using Fleet Manager's Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP Connection. This feature provides RDP connection right in your browser, and you don't even have to open up port 3389. So let's dive in to see how these features of Fleet Manager works, and you can decide if this is the right solution for you. To get started, let's begin with a demonstration. I'm logged into the AWS console in the US West 2 Oregon region, and I'm on the AWS Systems Manager page. Here on the left side, I'll click on the Fleet Manager. Right now, I have two EC2 instances named Demo Public Windows and Demo RDP Windows. I'll start by selecting the Demo Public Windows. Next, I'll go to Node Actions, Connect, Start Terminal Session. Now I'm connected to my Demo Public Windows in a PowerShell terminal. Note that under the hood, this uses Session Manager, but this solution is leveraging Fleet Manager's default host management feature, which we will get into details. Fleet Manager also has a unique feature for connecting to Windows Server using Remote Desktop Connection. For this, I'll select Demo RDP Windows. Go to Node Actions, Connect, Connect with Remote Desktop. I have two authentication types. For this demonstration, I'll select Key Pair. I'll select Choose File, and I'll select the key file that I use when I launch this EC2. For me, that is demo ec2 keypair.pem file. Open. Click on Connect. I can maximize this. You can see desktop connection similar to if you were connecting to Windows machine using Remote Desktop Client. However, in Fleet Manager, you get the Remote Desktop right in your browser. So that's a quick demonstration of how you can connect to EC2 using the Fleet Manager. While I'm here, if I select one of the EC2s in the Fleet Manager, you can see all kinds of details about this EC2 instance, even without connecting to the EC2 itself. So imagine if you have thousands of EC2s in your organization, you can use Fleet Manager to centrally see all kinds of details about each EC2, and if needed, remotely connect to them right from the Fleet Manager console. You can use Fleet Manager with EC2s in both public and private subnets, as well as on-prem virtual machines, and even VMs in other clouds like Azure and GCP. Now that you've seen how you can connect to EC2 using Fleet Manager, let's dive deeper to understand how this works. Here I have an architecture diagram of connecting to an EC2 using Fleet Manager's default host management feature. Note that the solution is based on Session Manager connecting to an EC2 inside a public subnet. I will explain the components of this solution and show you how to build this yourself. By the way, if you want to get this diagram and steps to build the solution, see the links in the description of this video. There are two use cases we will build. First is connecting to an EC2 using Session Manager with Fleet Manager's default host management. Second is connecting to a Windows server using Fleet Manager's Remote Desktop Connection feature. Let's start with Fleet Manager's default host management feature. If you launch an EC2 with the goal of connecting to it using Session Manager, one of the things we have to do is to attach a role in the EC2's instance profile with specific permissions. This role contains the necessary permissions that an SSM agent needs in order to interact with AWS services for Session Manager connection to work. If you watch the How to Connect to EC2 using Session Manager video, this was implemented using a custom role called Session Demo EC2 role, and it was attached to EC2's instance profile each time when launching a new EC2. This was necessary for both public subnet and private subnet with VPC endpoint. However, attaching this permission can be onerous when dealing with hundreds or even thousands of EC2s, each needing to attach this role. Someone can forget to do it, or in some cases, Session Manager permissions may need to be combined with other permissions. This is where the default host management feature can help. Essentially, you can eliminate the requirement to attach the role through the instance profile altogether and still make Session Manager work. The way this works is that you can create an IAM role one time for the system manager to assume, which grants permission to manage all instances in your AWS account and region. This replaces having to attach a role to each EC2 to grant Session Manager permissions. So before I launch my new EC2 instance to try this, I need to first configure the Fleet Manager's default host management. So let's go over to the AWS console to build a solution. So here I am on the AWS console in the AWS Systems Manager. One of the tools is the Fleet Manager, so I'll click on it. So from here, I can go to Account Management, Configure Default Host Management Configuration. AWS Console makes this step fairly straightforward. All I have to do is enable Default Host Management Configuration. Now I have to select IAM role. I'm going to select AWS Systems Manager Default EC2 Instance Management role. This is a role that's already been created by AWS, and it is a recommended solution, so I'll select that. Now I'll click on Configure. That's really all I have to do to enable the default host management configuration. But now let's go to IAM to see what actually happened. Here I am on the IAM page. I'll click on Roles. And I'll select the AWS Systems Manager Default EC2 Instance Management role that we selected. You can see that this role has one permission policy. If I look at the details of this policy, it has several allow statements. These statements allow the Systems Manager to manage the EC2s. And these actions allow Systems Managers to provide EC2 connections. If I look at the trust relationship of this role, you can see that this allows ssm.amazonaws.com, which is a systems manager service, to assume this role. Note that this is different from a role that we would have used if we attached to EC2 directly for Session Manager, which would allow EC2 to assume the role. So with this role, the Fleet Manager's default host management is enabled. Now that we have the Fleet Manager's default host management enabled, next step is to launch our EC2 instance. I'm going to launch a Windows EC2 instance inside a demo public subnet. For simplicity, I've already set up everything I need for Session Manager in a public subnet, including a route table and security group. If you want to watch detailed steps for setting up a Session Manager, you can watch the How Do I Connect to EC2 using Session Manager video. So here I am on the AWS console for EC2 service. I'll click on the Launch instance. I'll name this Demo Public Windows. For Applications and OS image, I'm going to select Microsoft Windows Server 2025 Base AMI. AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image, which is an image that provides the software needed to boot an Amazon EC2 instance. The image you choose here is important because in order for Session Manager to work, it needs a software called Systems Manager Agent running on it. By selecting the Microsoft Windows Server 2025 Base AMI, I know that SSM Agent is already installed on my EC2. If your server does not have the SSM Agent installed, then you must first install it. You can find AMIs with SSM Agent pre-installed, and all the operating system that supports SSM agent in the supported operating systems and machine types documentation. Just remember that for SSM to work, the Systems Manager agent must be installed and running. For instance type, I'll leave it as T3 micro. For key pair, I'm going to proceed without key pair. For the purpose of connecting to EC2 using Session Manager, we don't need a key pair. This is one of the main advantages of using Session Manager, which uses IAM credential to authenticate. For network, I'll click on Edit. For VPC, I'll select Demo VPC. For subnet, I'll select Demo Public Subnet. For auto-assign public IP, I'll select Enable. The public IP is required in this case because our EC2 is inside a public subnet and it needs to connect to 3 public AWS endpoints. This is not for the end user to reference the EC2 from the console or CLI over the internet. For firewall, I'll select Existing Security Group and I'll select Demo SSM Security Group. This security group allows outbound traffic from the EC2 to 3 public endpoints needed for Session Manager. And if you want to see more details on each of these configurations, you can watch How Do I Connect to EC2 using Session Manager video. Now, typically for Session Manager, we'd have to go to Advanced Detail and select the IAM instance profile and select a role here that allows this EC2 the permission necessary to provide the SSM connection. However, because we have the default host management enabled, we don't need to select an instance profile role here. This is the main advantage of using Fleet Manager's default host management feature. So with that, I'll launch instance. Let's go look at the detail. Now my demo public Windows EC2 instance is ready for use. Now that we have all of our components launched, let's test our connection using Fleet Manager's default host management. Our goal is to allow an IAM user named Brian to connect to our demo public Windows EC2. We'll try to connect using Fleet Manager, Session Manager, EC2 console, and finally AWS CLI. So in order for Brian IAM user to connect, he will need certain permission. So here I am on the IAM page under Users. If I click on Brian user, I can see that he has one permission policy attached. It is called Demo Session Manager User Policy. This policy has several allow statements that enable Brian IAM user to connect to EC2 instance using various connection methods that I mentioned. One thing to note here is that this policy has a resource statement that restricts the connection to the US West 2 region in the current AWS account. If you want to use this policy, be sure to update this resource statement to match your region and your AWS account number. So with that, let's go and connect as Brian. I'm going to use the handy multi-session feature, and I'll log in as Brian. Let's first go to Systems Manager. Here I'll go to the Fleet Manager. Notice that my demo public Windows is listed as one of the managed nodes. I'll select it, go to Node Action, Connect, Start Terminal Session. And now Brian is connected. Brian can also connect using Session Manager console page. I'll go to Session Manager, and from here, I can click on Start Session. And my demo public Windows is listed as a target instance. I'll select it, Start Session. And Brian is connected again using PowerShell. The next option I will demonstrate is the EC2 console page. So I'll navigate to EC2 page, go to Instances, and Brian can select the demo public Windows. Click on Connect, and here there are several options, and I'll select the Session Manager and simply click on the Connect button. And Brian is connected once more. The last option I'll demonstrate is using AWS CLI. So I have the terminal application open, and I already have the AWS CLI installed. And on this machine, I already have Ryan's access and secret access key configured on my credentials file. So when I issue the AWS command, it'll use Brian's credential. So the command I'm going to use is AWS SSM start session command. And for target parameter, I'm going to enter the instance ID of the demo public Windows EC2 instance. So I can get that from the details page. And I'll issue this command. Now Brian is connected using AWS CLI. So this demonstrates that Brian is able to connect to EC2 using Session Manager with Fleet Manager's default host management enabled. Now that we have default host management enabled, the Session Manager connection will work for any new EC2 within this region and AWS account as long as it has a Systems Manager agent running. You don't have to attach Session Manager permission to each EC2 using the instance profile role. The next feature we will discuss for Fleet Manager is the Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP connection for Windows servers. Typically, RDP connections require opening up port 3389 on the security group and having to install remote desktop client software on your laptop. With Fleet Manager, you don't need either of these things. Under the hood, Fleet Manager uses a technology called Amazon DCV to provide streaming from your EC2 to the browser. This software is included in the SSM agent, so you don't need to install it on your EC2 separately. There are some limitations, such as it only works with Windows Server 2012 RTM or later. You can see the full requirement on the Fleet Manager documentation. When you connect using Fleet Manager's RDP, you need to authenticate to the Windows server. Note that this is not the IAM user you are logged into for AWS console. You can get this Windows credential in one of three ways. First is to decrypt the administrator username and password using the EC2 key pair file you specified when you first launched the EC2. Another option is to provide the EC2 key pair file directly on the Fleet Manager console. These two options work fine, but you can see if you have thousands of EC2s with various EC2 key pair files, it can get messy to manage passwords or EC2 key pair files. So an alternative is to authenticate using IAM Identity Center. By using this method, you don't need to provide a username and password, nor EC2 key pair files for remote desktop using Fleet Manager. All of the components are the same as the previous use case except for two items. First is that the EC2 will require a key pair since I'm going to need it to decrypt the administrator's password. Second is that Brian IAM user will need slightly different permission in order to connect using Fleet Manager's RDP connection. Other than that, everything else is the same, including Fleet Manager's default host management and all other networking construct. So the first thing I'll do is launch a new EC2 with a key pair. So here I am on the EC2 page. I'll click on the Launch Instances. I'll name this Demo RDP Windows. For Application and OS images, I'll go to Windows and select the Microsoft Windows Server 2025 base as before. Instance type, I'll leave it as T3 Micro. And for key pair, I'm going to select Demo EC2 key pair. This is a key pair that I have created in a previous demonstration. If you don't have one, you can create a new one. Note that the reason why I'm selecting this key pair is because I need this to decrypt the administrator's password. For network setting, I'll click on Edit. For VPC, I'll select Demo VPC. Subnet, I'll select Demo Public Subnet. Auto-assign public IP, I'll enable this. I will need a public IP address since this EC2 is in a public subnet. For firewall, I'll select Existing Security Group. For security group, I'll select Demo SSM Security Group. This is the same security group as we used before. And that's it. I'll launch this instance. Let's go look at the details. And now my Demo RDP Windows is ready for use. The next step is to make sure Brian IAM user has proper permission to connect to our new Demo RDP Windows using Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection. Recall that in our previous use case, we attached a permission for Brian to connect using Session Manager only. The permission for Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection is slightly different, so we will need to attach a new permission for Brian. So here I am on the IAM service page. I'll click on Brian User. I see that currently Brian has Demo Session Manager user policy that we attached previously. Just to be explicit, I'm going to remove this policy. And I'm going to add a new permission. I'm going to attach policy directly. And I'm going to attach a policy called Demo Fleet Manager RDP User Policy. This is a policy that I created for the purpose of connecting to EC2 using Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection. I'll click Next, Add Permission. So now Brian has a new policy attached. If we look at the details of this policy, you can see there are several allow statements. These statements allow Brian to connect to EC2 using Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection. So now we're ready for Brian to try the connection. So now I'm going to navigate to the Fleet Manager page. Notice that here I am logged in as Brian IAM user. I see two managed nodes. The one I'm interested in is the Demo RDP Windows node that we just launched. So I have that selected. I'll go to Node Action, Connect, and this time I'll select Connect with Remote Desktop. Notice here that I have two authentication types, User Credential and Key Pair. For now, I'm just going to select Key Pair. Here, the administrator account name is automatically set as administrator. And the key pair file that it expects is the demo EC2 key pair that I used when I launched this instance. I have that file saved in my local machine, so I'll choose to upload the file. And here's my file, demo EC2 key pair.pem file. I'll select that, click on Open. Now that I have my key pair file, I'll click on the Connect button. And here I'm connected to the remote desktop. Note that this remote desktop is rendered right in my browser. I can maximize this screen. And now I have the view of the full desktop. And I can open the File Explorer. Now the word of caution here is that this remote desktop connection can be quite slow. The first time I tried to connect to this, it took almost 10 minutes before I abandoned and retried connecting. And second time, it connected within just a minute or two. But even after it connects, the rendering is quite slow. It's not quite as fast as when you're using an RDP client. Nevertheless, Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection works for Windows servers. I'm going to go back to the Fleet Manager connection. I'll select the demo RDP Windows again, Node Action, Connect with Remote Desktop. Here, if you want to use the user credential, you will need a username and password. For this option, you can go back to your EC2, click on Connect, go to RDP Client, scroll down to Get Password. Here you can upload a key pair file, in my case, demo EC2 key pair, and click on Decrypt Password. Now I have the username and password in the plain text. I can now use this information for the Fleet Manager's remote desktop. I'll copy the username, paste the username, and I'll copy the password and paste the password. And I can click on Connect. And here I'm connected again. So you can either provide the key pair file directly or use the key pair file to decrypt the administrator password and then use it as a credential. So this demonstrates that Brian IAM user is able to connect to an EC2 instance using Fleet Manager's remote desktop connection. So, is Fleet Manager the right solution for you? It has all the same advantages as Session Manager, like not having to open up network ports such as 22 for SSH. You can even connect to nodes inside a private subnet using VPC endpoint. You also don't need to provide a private key file or separate credential for terminal sessions. But you do need this if you want to connect to Windows via Fleet Manager's remote desktop. One way to get around this is to use IAM Identity Center, which I'll leave a link in the show notes if you're interested. If you're going to use Session Manager to connect to EC2, then it's very easy to use Fleet Manager's default host management feature. The setup for default host management is simple, and it provides a consistent, centralized solution for connecting to your EC2 inside your account and region. This way, you don't have to attach a session manager permission through a role inside an instance profile on each EC2. One downside of Fleet Manager's RDP connection is that it can be very slow. If you're doing a lot of tasks that require RDP connection, then it might be better to use other RDP client connection solutions. You can check out how to connect to EC2 using RDP video for more details. Well, I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for watching and keep on building.